Okay, so a couple of good things about the plant transport lab reports, okay, that I marked. In general, there were a lot of really good marks, okay. There were lots of marks in there, that were 24 out of 30 or higher, okay, which was good because a lot of people took the opportunity this time to come in and have me look them over. I think more than any other lab. Okay, and that's good because then obviously we catch your mistakes. You spend an extra 5 or 10 minutes looking it over, okay, and fixing those up, and then you get a much better mark. Okay, so I'm hoping that that trend is going to continue. As a result, obviously, then we also got a lot more stuff in the analysis correct. Okay, and we're going to go over a few of the things from there. The thing that concerns me is that while lots of marks were between 24 out of 30 and 30 out of 30, okay, there were several that were significantly lower than that. Okay, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I'm not going to name names or anything like that. But my concern is this. If you're not doing well on these lab reports, it's because you're just not doing the things that I tell you to do, or that you're not using the resources that are available to you. Okay, that is the podcast, listening to me in class in the first place, the podcast being secondary to that. Okay, and then obviously making use of the fact that I'll look your lab over before you hand it in. Okay, I mean, if you're getting less than 20 out of 30, it's just because you're not taking advantage of those things. Like I mark people's reports and I'm looking at their variables and going, I know I gave that variable out in class and this person got it wrong. Right? If I gave you that variable in class, there's no excuse for anyone to have it wrong except that you didn't listen, didn't use the podcast, and didn't come in to see me. Okay, so really, we got to make sure we're doing those things. Those are the easy ways to improve our mark. All right, so if you're not taking advantage of that, I'm ranting again on that thing that you should start doing that. All right, one of the big things, the problem, we had to restate that in our own words in the form of a question. I had it kind of grayed out on your Google Doc, which meant you were supposed to erase it and do it over again. Okay, the variables, the manipulated variable was that we changed the plant. Okay, we cut the roots off of it and stuck it in water. Right? The reason we did that was we wanted to eliminate any other forces that could move water. Right? By only leaving on the leaves, the only thing that could be moving water in the plant was osmotic pressure from the leaf. Okay? Had we left the roots on, then there was a possibility that any pushing force or pumping action that may or may not be present in the roots would still be there. What we wanted to prove is that plants can transport water using only that osmotic pulling force. That's why we manipulated the plant in the way we did. The responding variable was two things. The appearance of the plant, okay, which would mean that dye moved into the leaves and xylem tubes and things like that. Okay, and secondly, the volume of the water. We were looking at those two things because any change in those two things represented movement of water from the tube into the leaf and plant itself. Okay, controlled variables. Okay, essentially anything that could affect the plant's rate of photosynthesis had to be controlled. Not because we were comparing other people's plants to ours, but just because we wanted to make sure the plant actually carried out photosynthesis, because if it doesn't, it's not going to need to move any water either. All right, so we made sure that we put it in a window. We didn't put them in a box and throw them in the closet. Okay, they probably wouldn't have done very much had we done that. All right, so we made sure we put them in a window where they would get sunlight. Even if it was a cloudy day, they'd have got light, artificial light at least, from the lights in the room. All right, so they had a light source that would allow them to carry out photosynthesis. Okay, the temperature was controlled. At least it was within a range that would allow the plant to carry out photosynthesis, survive, and do well. It was about room temperature. Okay. Other things is that they all got essentially normal water. Okay, we didn't, other than having dye in it, there were no chemicals, okay, in the water that could have interfered with its ability to transport stuff. Okay, so essentially those were our big three controlled variables there. Okay, for the observations, was just looking for your before and after pictures. Okay, you didn't have to label them. All right, you just had to say before, after, and so that I could see the differences in the plant before and after. And then we had your volumes. Okay, a few people messed up the volume. Okay, I had a lot of people say they started out with 100 mils. You are a magician. You put 100 mils of water in a 25 mil beaker. There's no way you started out with 100 mils of water. Your beaker could only hold about 30. Okay, if you went all the way to the top, it might have held 31, maybe 32. Okay, but there's no way you started out with 100. What we were supposed to do was mix the dyed water in the 100, pour it into the smaller one, okay, and then go 100 minus whatever was left. For most people, it was about 70 mils that was left in the big beaker, which means there was 30 mils in the small beaker, okay, or the small graduated cylinder. All right, and then at the end of this all, we took what was in the small beaker, small graduated cylinder, poured it back in the big one, okay, and most people said it was around 28, okay, something like that. So how much water did your plant use? 2, okay, your initial volume minus your final volume gives you the change in volume, and for most people that was around 1 or 2 milliliters, something like that. All right, so that was question number 1. Okay, analysis question number 2. What evidence do you have that water followed the path discussed in class? The path we discussed in class is this. Water travels in the xylem, and then it moves into the veins, and then into the veinlets, and then into the spongy layer, and out the stomates as vapor. All right, the dye stops at the stomates. It cannot evaporate with the water, right? So it stays in there. What evidence do we have of that? We could see dye in all of the veins, in the stem itself, as well as probably, if you look close, and I did see it on several of your pictures, okay, that there were little dots on the bottom of your leaf, okay, little blue or red or whatever dots. That's the stomates. That's where your dye stopped, because water evaporated out of those little holes. Okay, that's the evidence we had in terms of appearance of the leaf. The other evidence that we had was there was less water in the graduated cylinder after than there was when we started. Okay. Okay, number 3 was the most important question. Predict the effect of adding salt to the water. Describe how you could test this prediction. All right, if I have this exact same setup, that's how I would test this. Exactly the same setup. Dyed water, okay, and a plant, all right, that's sticking out of it, all right, with a leaf, okay. I know it's a terrible drawing, but you get the idea. Okay, and I've got the stem kind of in the water. But this water I've poured salt into. Lots of salt. What's going to happen to that plant? In order for it to transport water, we're hoping that osmosis will do the job. For osmosis to do that job, salts have to be left behind in the leaf. Agreed? Okay. Is that going to be very much salt in the normal situation? Not very much. Doesn't have to be, because most of the time plants are using fresh water to grow. Okay, so a little bit of salt gets left here. That creates that osmotic pulling force that pulls water up the plant. Now I pour tons and tons of salt into this water. Can the plant control osmosis, or is osmosis passive? It's passive. The plant has no control over it. Osmosis just happens, and in this case, it's going to happen the wrong way. It's not reverse osmosis. That's an artificial process. Okay? It's still normal osmosis, but it's going to reverse the flow of water through the plant, because now water needs to move from the leaf down into this water in order to balance the salt concentration. All right? So the osmotic pulling force is actually going to go the other way, and it's going to cause the leaf to shrivel. Everyone follow on that? Okay? So all this question was really asking was, do you still remember what osmosis is and how it works? All right? It wasn't really asking about plant transport. It was just asking, if I've got lots of salt here and only a little bit here, which way is water going to go due to osmosis? Well, it's going to go to the area where there's less water, more salt, okay, in order to create a balance, because osmosis is a passive process. Does everyone follow me there? I usually have some sort of practical application question like that on the unit exam. Okay, to do with at least 1 or 2 of the big 3 methods of cellular transport. Okay, so that's diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. So remember those. All right, the conclusion. Okay, if our hypothesis, which we forgot to talk about, was something like this: if plants use osmosis to transport water from the roots to the leaves, and a plant has its roots removed and is placed in dyed water, then over the course of a few days we should see water moving, or dye moving into the leaf because there will still be salts left behind, an osmotic pulling force there to pull the water up the plant. Okay, so I've said what I think is going to be used for transport, I've said what I'm going to do to test it, and I've predicted my results. So for my conclusion, I'd have to say that I can accept my hypothesis. All right, so first I would restate my hypothesis, and then I would say I accept this because dye was found in the leaves, the water level in the graduated cylinder decreased, and all of this is evidence that water had to move from the graduated cylinder to the plant. All right. Okay, sources of error in this experiment. Number one source of error, Mr. Quadair did not get the plants he wanted. Okay, I told you guys that morning. I said, yeah, you know what? I bought the last 3 plants, okay, that Wally World had, and they weren't the ones I wanted. All right, and as a result, unfortunately, I got a few plants that were xerophytes. Okay, we talked about those yesterday. Do xerophytes use very much water? They do not, and so as a result, some of our plants didn't move very much water, and they didn't change color very much. That's certainly a source of error. It was beyond your control. I said use these plants, and you had to. Okay, so yeah, that's a source of error. How do we fix that? Quadair looks at more places and doesn't wait until 9:30 the night before to go looking for plants for the lab. Okay, yeah, okay, I was disorganized that night, and that was the only place that was still open that had plants. Okay, so yeah, that's certainly a source of error. Okay, second source of error. Did we have a perfect seal against the plant? Nope, it was as good as we could make using the procedure and the materials we had, but it wasn't perfect. Is it possible that some of the water that disappeared from the graduated cylinder may have just evaporated out the hole? It is. Do we know how much? There's no way for us to know that. Okay, but it's certainly a possible source of error for us because it was beyond our control and it was something, you know, that was inherent to the lab procedure itself. Right? Things again that we don't want to list. We put too much dye in. We didn't put enough dye in. Okay, those aren't things you should be listing. Did I tell you how much dye to put in? Yeah, I did. Okay, if you put in that much dye, you got the right amount. Okay. Follow the instructions, and human error does not become a source of error. Remember, if you admit to making a mistake, you've just said, I screwed up and wasn't willing to fix it. All right? That's not a source of error. Okay, for the class discussion, okay, why did you place the plant in the sunlight? We kind of talked about this already. Would it have transported any water if we didn't? No, it wouldn't have, because it wouldn't have carried out any photosynthesis and would have had no need to move water. Okay? Would the results have been different if you'd have kept it in the dark? Yes, the plant would have done nothing and probably died. Okay? If you place the entire plant and its leaves under water, explain whether light would be necessary for the cells to fill with water. So here's the situation. I have a plant in the dark with the setup we had. Okay, so the leaf's in air and it's in the dark. Next to it, I have a plant exactly the same, but I've completely submerged it in water. Is either one of them going to move the dye? No, they're both in the dark. Okay, so neither one of them is going to carry out photosynthesis. Now, had I submerged a leaf completely and left it in the sun, would it move dye? It wouldn't. Remember, in order for the plant to transport water, water has to evaporate out of the stomates. Can it do that if the leaf is submerged? No. Plus, I don't know how I would have submerged the leaf and had part of it in the dye anyway. I think they all would have mixed. But okay, in the end, that wouldn't work either. Okay, these plants are terrestrial plants. They've evolved to have their leaves above water in order to work. Okay, so that would have had no effect. Okay. Discuss the natural reactions and adaptations of plants that might help maintain water balance. Okay, I mentioned to you last week that I always ask this on the unit exam. I usually ask it on the final exam. What are the 2 ways a plant limits its water loss? Yes, it is the waxy cuticle and the stomates. Okay, the waxy cuticle secreted by the epidermis covers the leaf, doesn't allow water to escape. Okay, and the stomates can open and close based on the level of water and salts within the leaf, and that allows the plant to essentially control when it carries out photosynthesis and how much water actually evaporates from the plant. Okay, so again, that is something we definitely need to study this weekend in preparation for our test. Okay, questions on that? All right. All right, last lesson in this unit, guys. Plant growth and development. All right, so we're going to talk about a few of the things that plants do, okay, while they're growing. Okay, we're going to look at plant hormones. Plants have hormones just like animals have hormones. They're chemical messengers that signal the plant to do things. Okay, so our key points for today. Okay, sorry, you need your notes package out, yeah. Okay, understand what factors influence the growth of plants. Did we talk about that the other day? Okay, that's what we talked about the other day, is the factors that affect plant growth. So, sunlight, okay, we got water, temperature, periodic disturbances, presence of other organisms, all of those kind of things all affect the growth of a plant. Now we're going to look more at how does the plant respond to those factors. Okay? If a plant needs light in order to survive, a plant is likely going to grow in the direction of the light. Agreed? Okay? We talked about that a little while ago. Okay? When I was talking about these two plants here. This one's taken quite a while to come back. I let it get really, really wilty. Still looks really, really wilty, but I watered it a couple days ago. Okay? This one here I never turned. So where's all the foliage? On this side, the side that faces the window. This one I turn every time I water it. Okay? And it's got foliage on all sides, pretty evenly distributed. Why? Because plants grow towards their energy source. It would only make sense. Why would a plant grow away from the light? It won't be able to feed itself if it does that. All right, so plants are going to grow towards the light. Do plants need to sometimes compete with other plants for light? Okay, what if I've got a little plant that's growing in the middle of a big forest and it's shaded? It can't tell where the sun is. How does it know which way to grow then? Yeah, growing upwards. Plants in general grow upwards in response to what? Even if they can't see light, they know which way is up and down because of gravity. Yeah, plants, I mean, they don't have a brain like we do, and we're like, oh, I know which way is up and down. Okay, but they have a sense for which way is vertical, right? Plants grow in response to gravity. They grow away from it. Okay? And as a result, they usually get to the sun because usually the sun is up. Okay, and so plants will generally grow in an upwards direction against gravity. Right? So they have some sort of sense of that. The other part of growing in response to gravity is it helps a plant to keep itself balanced. Occasionally, a plant gets knocked over. Right? If it doesn't get completely uprooted, it'll start growing straight again. And it'll have a big curve in it, but it'll start growing straight up and down in response to gravity. Simply because by doing that, it'll actually get itself back over its roots and be better balanced. If it kept growing at an angle, okay, so if I've got a tree, okay, and it gets knocked over like this, okay, it's not going to keep growing out this way, because if it does, it puts more and more stress on the roots over on this side, and it'll eventually tip. But if it starts to grow back this way, okay, and kind of upwards, then it'll get better balanced, and it'll stay over its roots, and it has a better chance for survival. Right? And we see this. I'll show you a few pictures. I've got a few in here, okay, that show plants actually doing these kinds of things. We're going to look at what hormones are responsible for growth and development, okay, and we're going to look at how plant shape is not fixed, but it is the result of the interaction of environmental factors and growth responses. Okay? Believe it or not, these two plants, this one and this one, are genetically identical. Right? Because I grew them from cuttings of another plant. Okay? So I cut pieces off of another plant, put them in rooting compound, and put those two plants in separate pots. Okay? Those two plants grew from those cuttings, so they are genetically identical. They're effectively clones of each other. They'll have the same shape. Their leaves are the same shape because that's something that's coded for in the genetic code of a plant. But the final overall body shape of a plant is not something that's part of its DNA like it is for us. Okay? Human DNA says, 2 arms, 2 legs, okay? 8 fingers, 10 toes, 2 thumbs. Thumb's not a finger. Okay? Right? So you got all of that, okay, is kind of part of the blueprint of the human body. We know that people are generally going to have that shape. Okay, I mean, there's obviously other, proportions that are different for people, but okay, in general, that's coded for in our DNA. That's not coded for in a plant's DNA. Its shape is actually more determined by its environment, okay, than it is by its genetic code. All right, so that's kind of what we'll talk about here with this slide. Okay, Shay, can I have you turn off the front set of lights for me there, so we can see these pictures a little better? Thank you. Okay, so plants have this problem. Wherever it is they grow, they're stuck there. Okay, this isn't the Lord of the Rings. Okay, they're not Treebeard. They can't pick up and go. Okay, when things don't suit them. All right, they have to stay wherever it was they started out. And so, as a result, they have to adapt to whatever their environment does. An animal, if it doesn't like what's going on where it is, it just moves. Okay, because animals are able to pick up and go. Right? So a plant, that's part of the reason why its shape is determined by its environment and not by its genetic code. That helps it to adapt to whatever happens in its environment. Right? So in this picture here, it's kind of a bit hard to see because of the lighting, but this tree here has this shape. Okay, the trunk of the tree goes out like this, and then it curves back. These branches right here are part of this plant. Okay, it grew back over its own roots. Okay, what would have possibly caused that to happen? Why would it have that shape? Landslide. Yeah. Okay, or avalanche. I mean, I don't know what time of the year it happened, but this plant got knocked over. Okay, and you often see that on steep hillsides. Okay, a plant gets knocked over because of a rock slide or an avalanche or whatever. Okay, and as a result, it needs to start growing back over its roots to maintain balance. It didn't do this to get light. It could have grown out this way. There's no other trees around here that would have shaded it. Right? It could have still carried out photosynthesis growing that way. Okay, but growing back over its roots allows it to maintain its balance and not become uprooted. Right? Again, it's not a conscious decision. It's just that plants have a sense of which way is up and down. Right? Other things that we might see would be the distribution of a plant's roots. Okay? Generally, they go out in kind of an even radius from the center of the plant, but sometimes an area of soil might have more nutrients and more water in it, so the plant will naturally grow more roots in that direction. Okay? Again, it's not part of its genetic code to say I have to randomly and evenly distribute my roots in all directions. Okay? It doesn't do that. It puts them wherever the resources are. Okay? Everyone following me there? Right? Which is why no two trees in the forest are exactly alike. Well, this would be a few years worth of growth for sure. We actually, at the golf course that I worked at, we had a tree that was really old. I mean, it was probably 4 feet around at the bottom, and it had gotten knocked over because the creek had eroded out underneath it, and so it had started falling, and it had gotten to the point where it was almost horizontal, but the end of it was vertical. Okay, it was trying. There was no hope of it ever getting back out over its roots, but it was still trying. Okay, and eventually just fell down. But I mean, they make that effort at least to try and rebalance themselves. Okay, also had one that was really weirdly shaped at the golf course. Okay, had here's the ground, and there was this shrub. Okay, like kind of a little bushy plant, and growing right next to it was this evergreen. The evergreen's trunk was here, and it went like this. That was the shape of the evergreen's trunk. Okay, why? Because shrubs grow faster than evergreens do. They probably germinated around the same time. But this little sapling would have gotten shaded by the shrub. So what it did is it started growing more foliage out here in the sun when the shrub was maybe only about this big. Okay, and so it started growing over here where it wasn't shaded, but then once it got back into the light and wasn't shaded anymore, it started growing in response to gravity so that it could remain balanced. But it had this big wow right in the middle of its trunk. Okay, it was the funkiest looking tree ever. Right? But you just see some things like that. Okay. All right. Okay, so the big thing here, guys, is stop doing that. Okay, is that the shape of the tree is somewhat plastic. And I don't mean that it's actually made of like plastic. I mean plastic means that it's malleable, or it can change. You can make it take whatever shape is necessary. All right? All right, so control of plant growth and development. A houseplant on a windowsill grows towards the light. You can see that in this picture here. All the leaves on that plant face the same way. Obviously, the light source for this plant is located over here. Okay? And as a result, the plant grows towards it. All right? Any growth pattern that changes the shape of a plant is called a tropism. Okay, so any growth that changes the shape of a plant is called a tropism. There are different kinds of tropism. This, in this picture, is phototropism. Photo means light, right? Photosynthesis, photoautotroph, phototropism, okay, all refers to light. So this is a change in shape or a growth response to light. Okay, so anytime you see a plant that's doing that, it is undergoing phototropism. Phototropism is probably the most common growth pattern plants will employ. Okay. Okay, another place where you'll sometimes see this, and you probably haven't noticed this because no one's ever pointed it out, but if you go into a river valley, okay, you'll typically see more trees on one side of the river valley than the other. Okay, so let's say that this is, at least in the northern hemisphere, okay, the north side and the south side of a river valley. Okay, the south side of the river valley is where the trees grow. Anyone know why? Which side gets the most direct sunlight? Actually, the north side, because it faces south, and that's where the sun is. Okay, so the sun in the northern hemisphere anyway, most of the year is kind of off slightly to the south. All right, and so it's slightly to the south, meaning most of the time the direct sunshine is hitting this side of the river valley, but this side is more in the shade. So you typically will see your plants and your trees, sorry, growing on this side down near the bottom where there's a little bit more shade. And typically, they're going to have their foliage on the side that gets the most sunshine. Okay, over here you're going to have grasses and things that are more tolerant of hot temperatures. All right, you're lost in the forest. You can't tell, you don't have a compass. How do you tell which way is north in the forest? You can't see the sun. You don't have a compass. How can you tell which way is north? Right, you look at the trees. Moss always grows on the north side of the trees because the north side of the tree is shaded. Okay, so here's our tree. Here's the north side. Remember that the sun is usually in the south. That means its rays hit the south exposed face of the tree. The north side's always going to be in the shade. Okay, you're going to get plants that can't tolerate direct sunlight growing in the shade. Right? So the trees will have moss only growing on the north side. You go down to New Zealand, the other way. Okay? So keep that in mind. Okay? If you ever go to New Zealand, you get lost in the forest in New Zealand, the rule is reversed in the southern hemisphere. Okay? I would hate for anyone to get lost misapplying that rule. All right, so in a forest or other natural ecosystem where plants may be crowded, phototropism directs the growing seedling towards the sunlight. Okay, this and other types of plant growth are controlled by different kinds of plant hormones, which we're going to go over. How do you suppose a plant makes itself curve like that? Okay, part of it has to do with the cell wall. I mean, the cell wall has to... The cells aren't really going to curve themselves. But what we do notice if we look at samples of cells from both sides of a curved part of a plant, okay, so let's say I've got a tree that's curved, okay, like this. If I look at the cells on the inside, they tend to be short. I know this is looking like a bad smile right now, but okay. The cells on the outside tend to be longer. The reason that is because these cells get more of the growth hormones, and so they grow longer, faster. So if these ones are growing faster and longer than these ones, they naturally stretch this side of the plant and compress this side, and that's how you get a curve. Right? It would be the same thing as if I put two people out there on the track. I made one person run in the inside lane, one person in the outside lane, and made them start at exactly the same spot. The person on the outside would have to run faster because they're going to have to run farther. Okay? So they would have to run faster just to tie the person on the inside, which is why in a real race you stagger them. Okay? But okay, in this case there's no stagger. There's just that this side grows faster than this side, and as a result that makes the outside bigger than the inside, and that curves the plant. Okay? It's a differential rate of growth. Okay? So we might want to say here, okay, tropisms are caused by differential rates of growth. Okay, and that's caused by plant hormones, and we're going to go over which ones in particular are the ones that cause that. Okay, because just like our body, we have different hormones for different jobs. Right? We certainly have, growth hormone, HGH, human growth hormone, okay, that's naturally present in our body, not the kind that, Alex Rodriguez and the other roid monkeys use. Okay, we have just the stuff that you're supposed to have. Okay, hopefully you all only have the amount you're supposed to have, because that stuff's not good for you. And that controls tissue growth, tissue regeneration, things like that. Okay, you also have your gender-specific hormones, okay, that have to do with maturation and growth and things like that. Okay, so if you're a guy, you generally have more testosterone. Testosterone generally leads to different bone structure, different muscle mass, okay, and things like that. Okay, whereas if you have estrogen and things like that, you get slightly different bone structure, slightly different muscle distribution and mass, okay, and things like that. All right. Now that's not to say that obviously working out and things like that can't change that to some extent, but there's still that sort of general effect of those hormones. Okay, everyone follow me on that? Okay, and we've seen that unfortunately, in steroid use. Okay, in Olympic athletes. You guys are probably too young to remember this person, but Florence Griffith Joyner was a sprinter for the United States back in the late 80s. And if there was ever a woman who looked mannish, okay, it was FloJo, right? Because she took a lot of testosterone, okay, in order to improve her performance. Okay, she had manly muscles. Okay, like large jaw, like her jaw muscles made her jaw look big. Okay, she looked very mannish. Back in the early 80s, when the Soviet Union was still around, okay, a lot of the East German women, okay, won lots of medals, okay, in swimming and things like that, and they were all on the juice. Okay, they had this massive doping program that they had. Okay, it was discovered later when unfortunately all of these people died of cancer. Right? Because injecting people with large amounts of hormones that aren't supposed to be in their body is really hard on the liver. Right? And FloJo, she died from liver cancer. Okay, a lot of these East German women died of liver cancer later on. Okay, and it's unfortunate, but these hormones, these chemical messengers that are present in plants, present in people, okay, they have certain effects on the body. Right? And if those effects are larger than they're supposed to be, there can be problems. All right, so there's 5 classes of plant hormones, each concerned with a particular environmental stimulus. All right, we got all these roots, or all these sprouts, sorry, growing this direction. What can we assume is over to the right-hand side there? Yeah, probably the light source, okay, whether it's the sun or an artificial light or whatever, it's over there. Why is this one the oddball? Why is this one doing this? What's that? Okay, how much, like, this is how long it is, let's say, right now, okay? If it wanted to grow over here to get sun, let's say the light source is right here, okay? Is it quicker to get into the light by growing this way and taking advantage of the angle, or growing and trying to get over here to get into the sun? Yeah, okay, growing straight's actually a bit easier. So it probably just grew according, in response to gravity until it got some sunlight and then just kept growing. Okay, once it was in the light, it didn't really need to bend so much, right? Whereas these ones here, okay, they could probably sense, because they're a little closer to the front, knew where the light was and just grew towards it. This one was so far to the back that it couldn't see the light when it first started growing, so it just grew straight up. All right. First type of plant hormone, auxins. Okay? Auxins are the plant equivalent of human growth hormone. Okay? That auxins are like PGH, plant growth hormone. Okay? They do essentially the same thing. They cause a lengthening, okay, or an increase in the size of the plant. Okay? So an auxin is any chemical substance that promotes elongation of the plant. Elongation means to get taller, longer, okay, or spread out more. Okay? The single most important function of auxin is to stimulate the elongation of cells in young, developing shoots. All right? So this doesn't have much effect on the base of a plant or the stem of a plant. It's mostly going to be in the buds or in the newest growth on the plants, right? Because those cells can actively get longer and grow a bit more. Okay? So auxins can also be used to make plants develop fruit without being pollinated. If a plant doesn't get pollinated but still makes fruit, what won't be in the fruit? Seeds. Okay? That's how you make seedless fruit. All right? So these two pictures here are of the same place, a few weeks apart. What's different? The trees are gone? Yeah, okay. And this isn't a logging thing. Okay? There's no logging here. Okay? This is in a very, well, it's not very small, but it's a small country in Southeast Asia. These pictures were taken around 1969. Nope, not a nuclear explosion. Nope, no one's detonated a nuclear bomb in Southeast Asia. There was a war going on, though. What war was going on in the late 60s, early 70s? Okay, Cold War was going on, but the Cold War didn't have any action. This war had lots of fighting and other violence. Starts with V. Yeah, Vietnam. Okay, this is in Vietnam. And the problem that the Americans had in Vietnam was this. There were lots of places for the VC, the Viet Cong, the Communist Army, to hide. They had an intricate tunnel system. There was, tropical rainforest that was really thick. So there were lots of places for them to hide. And they would jump out and ambush the American soldiers. And, well, obviously no one likes getting killed. So, okay, the Americans said, fine. You want to hide in the forest? We're going to take away the forest. Okay? And the CIA came up with this stuff that it called Agent Orange. That was its code name. You know it now as Killex. It's the stuff that's in weed and feed that kills dandelions. Okay? CIA came up with that. All right? So they developed this stuff. They called it Agent Orange. Why? It kills anything green. Okay? Because what it is an artificial auxin. When it lands on the plant absorbs the vapor through the stomates. And then it starts stimulating all of the cells to grow really fast. So fast that the plant can't keep up. It can't supply energy, it can't supply water, it can't supply nutrients for all of this growth that keeps trying to happen, and eventually the plant grows itself to death. Okay? If you've ever seen what happens to a dandelion when it gets sprayed with this stuff, it gets like long and coily and stringy. Okay? It just grows really, really fast, tries to get really, really long, and then dies because it simply can't support that kind of growth with the root system and nutrient base that it has. All right. So what happened here is they sprayed the forest with this stuff, okay? And in a matter of weeks, the forest was all dead. Floods came and washed away basically everything. Okay? So all that was left was just mud. All right? Well, there's nowhere for you to hide, and your tunnel system's probably full of water. All right? So yeah, it worked pretty well that way. Here was the problem. They sprayed it on everything. Okay? They sprayed it on their own soldiers who happened to be in the area. They sprayed it on the Vietnamese soldiers. They sprayed it on the peasants, the farmers, the animals, everybody. Okay? And, well, it causes essentially cancer in plants. Guess what it caused in the people and the animals? Yeah, and not slowly. Okay, it happened pretty quickly. It's pretty vile stuff. Right? If you've ever actually had to mix this stuff, it has an awful, awful smell. And if you inhale any of it, that smell stays with you for like a day. Okay, at least, like even if you're not smelling it anymore, you can still smell it. It's really noxious stuff, right? And obviously, it causes all kinds of health problems for other people, right? And of course, if you spray it on some poor peasant's rice paddy, okay, they got nothing to eat, right? So this was kind of a big problem in that it wasn't a very selective herbicide, right? It actually is a selective herbicide for what we use it for now, which means you can put it on your lawn and it only kills the dandelions. It doesn't kill grass, right? It only kills broad-leafed plants, right? Grass has a narrow leaf, so it leaves grass alone and kills anything with a broadleaf. But if you spray it on anything in your flower bed, it will die. Okay, so you have to be careful where you put it. All right, so that's kind of what it can be used for. Now, something else it can do, like we said, it can trick plants into thinking they've been pollinated and making fruit without any seeds in it. But in order to do that, you have to spray it on the blossoms. Now, if you spray it in a small enough amount, it works. You spray it too heavy and you kill the whole plant, right? Now you have to consider though, this is pretty nasty stuff. You have to decide whether having fruit with no seeds that's been sprayed with this stuff is better than picking the seeds out. I'll let you decide that one. Okay, that's how they make seedless fruit. Okay, you can also see here that when you spray a plant with this stuff, okay, or you make it overload with auxins, it doesn't grow as many what? Roots. Okay, remember, this affects the young growing shoots. So it grows lots of stuff up here, but not much root to support it. And so as a result, again, it grows itself to death because it can't support that kind of growth. Okay? Whereas this plant's got lots of roots and very little foliage. All right, so very common use of auxins, okay, is as a herbicide. It can be used to kill off things if you put it on in large amounts. Okay? In the same way that taking steroids for a long period of time will eventually kill you. Okay? Well, this is kind of like putting a plant on the juice really heavily. All right, so auxins will help a plant get longer. Sometimes a plant needs to make new cells. It's got a hormone for that too. You probably noticed that plants tend to live a long time. Right? There are some trees that live in the world that are hundreds or even thousands of years old. Right? You don't see any animals that are hundreds or thousands of years old. We simply can't live that long. Our cells, as they divide, start making mistakes. Okay, and the older you get, the more mistakes your cells make, and eventually, you start getting things like cancer and stuff like that are caused by mistakes made during cell division. Well, for plants, they kind of have this hormone that keeps that from happening. Okay, this hormone is called cytokinins. It causes cells to divide, okay, and produce new cells to replace ones that have maybe started making mistakes. All right, so the ones that start making mistakes, essentially, they kind of die off, they don't divide anymore, and the new cells divide, okay, and they produce newer, healthier cells, right? So these plants essentially, or these hormones essentially slow down the aging process. They are called cytokinins. Cyto means cell, kinesis means splitting, okay? Cytokinesis, cytokinins, okay? These hormones cause cell division, all right? Okay, so as the cells divide, the plant can replace old, diseased, or damaged cells with new healthy ones, and that can slow down its aging process. Okay, oldest plant in the world is the Methuselah tree. Okay, it lives in a secret location somewhere in California. Right, the Forestry Service keeps its location a secret actually because there's stupid people out there that try and burn it down. And it is over 6,000 years old. 6,000 years old. Okay, that tree has seen a lot. All right, gibberellins. Okay, gibberellins are another type of hormone that a plant can produce. Right? We tend to see its effects in the leaves and the stem, okay, but not as much on root growth. Mostly within the stem is where you see the effects of gibberellins. Gibberellins also cause a lengthening, but they cause a lengthening in a different place than auxins do. All right. Now, if you have an overproduction of gibberellins, there's a problem with that. Okay, you'll start to have too much vertical growth and not enough horizontal growth. And what will happen is you get really tall with no ability to support it. Okay, it would be like trying to build like a giant skyscraper with only one thing with only like one supporting column. Right? It'll get wobbly and it'll fall down. Okay? And that's what happens in some plants that get too much gibberellins. There's a problem with this in places that grow rice, because to grow, has anyone ever seen where they grow rice? The rice paddies are like flooded, right? Like they use flood irrigation. The rice can grow right out of the flooded soil. Okay? But in those conditions, you often tend to get a lot more fungus growing. And there's a type of fungus that grows on the roots, which is where gibberellins are produced. Okay, and causes them to secrete more gibberellins. And when they do this, the rice plants grow really tall, but they're really skinny. And then a wind comes up, blows them over, and they break off. And then they die. Okay? Then they call that foolish seedling disease. Okay? But it's caused by an overproduction of gibberellins. The plants get really skinny stems that are too long and they can't support their foliage. All right? Gibberellins can also cause an increase in the size of the fruit that is produced. All right? So sometimes a little bit of that will be sprayed on fruit plants in order to get them to produce larger fruit. Okay? So if you've ever gone to the store and bought those strawberries that are the size of your fist, okay? Probably not natural. Okay, you probably did not buy the fist-sized strawberries in the organic section of the supermarket. Okay, because usually those require a little input of juice. Okay, same with if you got the really big. Sometimes you see those giant grapes. Okay, like they're bigger around than a toonie. Right, probably also not in the organic section. All right, typically natural fruit tends to be a bit smaller, right? So if you're looking at really big fruit, it probably has some input of hormones into it in order to increase its size. Okay. Abscisic acid, okay? It's not so much a hormone, but it is a chemical that's produced by plants. And it's really important for plants here because it's the hormone that blocks the production of chlorophyll, and that helps to prepare a plant for dormancy. Okay? So this is what plants produce in the fall. Right, so abscisic acid gets produced by the plant and it interferes with the plant's ability to make chlorophyll. Okay? Since the plant can't produce chlorophyll and chlorophyll eventually needs to be replaced, it gets kind of used up. Right? Then the plant stops carrying out as much photosynthesis, it doesn't transport as much water, the leaves turn orange and brown and they fall off, and the plant is now ready for winter. Right? So abscisic acid is really important in that regard. And what you can see here is an experiment that they were doing with different dosages of abscisic acid. And you can see that these ones here near the front are yellow, okay, and essentially dormant, whereas the ones in the back are still flowering. All right? So the larger, the later on in the year that they get this stuff, okay, the more of it they'll produce and the more they'll go dormant. Okay? Now, in the desert, plants will also use that, but they'll use it at the opposite time of the year. Okay, when the days are getting longer, they'll be producing it in order to go dormant. Okay, and in preparation for the hot, dry season. Okay, everyone with me there? So abscisic acid, okay, is for dormancy, slows down growth. Okay, and we should probably mention, okay, interferes with chlorophyll production. Okay, and that's what causes the changing of the colors. Okay, the green becomes absent because no more chlorophyll is being produced. Only the other pigments are there. Okay, and those aren't enough to support the plant. Okay, ethylene. Ethylene is a gas that is naturally produced by the sepals, okay, of a plant. Sepals are those small leaves at the base of a flower, okay, or the small leaves that you would see near the fruit. Okay? It's produced by other parts of the plant, but those are the primary places where they're produced. And the fruit itself will also produce a little bit of ethylene gas. What ethylene does is it causes the ripening of fruit, and it affects the rest of the plant, okay, causing senescence. Okay? If this is a perennial plant, it signals the production of abscisic acid, which signals dormancy. If it's an annual, it tells the plant, you've done your job. It's time to go gently into the night. Okay? And signals essentially for the plant to die. Okay? Now, I know that seems odd. It seems like, okay, the plant tells itself to die. But it actually has to do that so that any fruit that hasn't been consumed by an animal will fall to the ground and rot and release the seeds. Okay? If it doesn't do that, okay, then it can't reproduce for the next year. So it's important in that regard. So we see that especially with tomatoes. Okay? How many people's parents or themselves grow tomatoes in their garden? Okay? For us in Canada, we grow tomatoes differently. We take them off when they're green so they don't get frozen, right? Because it's the first week of September and we're going to have a major killing frost, so we have to take them off, okay, or cover them up, and then we put them on the windowsill and we put them all together. Okay? Why does that cause them to ripen? Well, you put all the fruit together, okay? And all the ethylene gas they produce helps to trigger the ripening process in the other fruit around it. If you want tomatoes to ripen really quickly, put them in a box with a couple of apples, because the apples are already ripe and they're already producing a fair amount of ethylene gas, and they'll actually cause the tomatoes to ripen more quickly, especially if they're in a box where the ethylene gas can't escape. Which fruit produces the most ethylene gas? Bananas. Okay? You ever notice this? Like, you buy bananas when they're yellow and they're brown before you get them eaten, right? Okay? That's the banana principle. The other half of the banana principle is that if you buy them green, you generally eat them before they're ready. Okay? It just never works out with bananas. You buy them green, you eat them before they were really good. You buy them yellow, you didn't eat them and they were brown. Okay? So yeah, they produce a lot of ethylene gas, and if you put, older bananas next to newer bananas, these ones turn yellow really fast. Okay? If you put bananas in with anything, okay, it ripens really quickly. All right? I made this mistake, and I don't know why I made it, but I put a banana in my son's lunch, okay, like back in the fall, and sealed it in his lunch kit. Well, by lunchtime, the banana was brown. Okay? All that ethylene gas was trapped in his lunch kit, okay, in this tiny little space, and it comes on, why did you give me that brown banana? Okay? It was yellow when I put it in there. Okay? Yeah, it doesn't take long for that ethylene gas is trapped, okay, for that effect to happen. That's also why you usually hang bananas. All right? You generally don't leave them sitting on a countertop, because if they're sitting anywhere, that spot where they're in contact with the surface, the ethylene gas will get trapped in that tissue, and that spot will get soft, okay, before the rest of the banana. So it's always a good idea to hang bananas from the top part, okay, from this part up here, okay, because that part doesn't matter if it ripens a little more quickly. Okay. Now, you've probably also seen, like, advertised on TV, they've got these green bags that you can buy, okay, and it's supposed to keep fruit and vegetables good for a longer period, okay, and there's actually some science to that, because it actually says right in the ad, they absorb ethylene gas, which is produced by all plants, and if they absorb it, these plants and fruit and whatever you put in there are going to stay good for a longer period of time. All right. If I'm going to test you on the hormones, probably a lot of that will be in the multiple choice, okay? Probably with pictures, okay? Things like that. So keep that in mind when you're studying for that. Okay? I would say the hormones could also be part of a written response question that would have to do with these tropisms that we're going to talk about now, okay? Because these growth patterns are caused by mostly auxins. Auxins are the primary hormone involved in making tropisms happen, because we talked about it kind of back at the beginning here, that in order for a plant to bend like this one is, the outside of the plant has to grow faster than the inside of the plant. And the cells are generally longer on the outside. Okay? And the way that cells get longer is by getting auxins. Auxins are the hormone that causes elongation of cells. All right? So tropisms are growth responses that result in curvatures of the whole plant. Okay, or of plant organs if we're talking about like stems and stuff like that. Okay, and the mechanism for that, okay, is a differential rate of growth on opposite sides of the organ. Okay, and I think I actually wrote that on a slide previous to this. Okay, so that's pretty important. Okay, and there's 3 stimuli that initiate tropisms: light, gravity, and touch. Okay, are the 3 things that will cause a plant to change its shape. How many people have ever bought one of those bamboo plants that have the coil in it? Okay, right. Okay, that's a tropism. Okay, they actually train the bamboo to grow like that. What they do is they put a pipe in the pot with the bamboo, and they tie the bamboo to the plant. As it gets longer, they keep tying it to the tube. Okay, and then it grows around the tube by touch. Then they take the tube out and sell it to you. Okay, because you look at it and you go, oh, that's so cool, it's a curved plant. But really, you probably could have done it on your own. Okay, if you had just a thin piece of PVC pipe, right, you could have tied it to the tube and over the course of a few months made it look like that. All right, here's the 3 tropisms. Geotropism. Geo means earth. Earth is what causes gravity. Okay, mass is what causes gravity, but earth has got its own gravity because of its mass. So geotropism is caused by gravity. Okay, and we can see that here in the trunk of this tree. Okay, it's curved like this, right? Got pushed over when it was probably about this tall, and since then has tried to grow back over its roots. You can see that on this little kind of shrubby tree here as well. Okay, it's grown like that uphill. Most of the time plants don't fall uphill, right? So you can bet that that was a growth that happened after it was knocked over. Okay. All right, and same thing with this plant. Okay, not that I would try this at home, because usually when you tip a pot over like this, the dirt comes out. Mom probably won't appreciate that on her white carpet. Okay, so yeah, don't try that at home. All right, phototropism. Phototropism, light. Okay, so tropism means curvature, change in growth. Okay, it's the prefix that tells you what the cause is. Phototropism is growth response to light. So we've seen this picture already. Here's a picture I've drawn for you now like 2 times, but way better than I could draw it. Okay, you can see that on the inside, where all the light is coming in, the cells are shorter. On the outside, where there's less light, these cells are getting more auxins. Okay, and so as a result, these cells are growing longer than these ones, and that puts pressure on the plant and essentially makes the plant bend, okay, towards the light. All right, so the outside of the curve is growing faster than the inside, okay, and that's going to cause the plant to change its shape. Okay, questions on that? All right. Okay, and lastly is Figmotropism. Figmo means touch. Okay, so it's a sensation sort of stimulated growth pattern, right? And we see this in plants that can grow up the sides of buildings, like ivy. Right, so if you've ever seen like some of those Ivy League schools, okay, a lot of their older buildings have ivy growing up the sides because they're made out of brick, and brick is one of the best surfaces for ivy to grow on because it's rough. Okay? It also reacts easily with some of the acids that these plants produce. Okay? These plants here, these ones that I was using as an example earlier, they do this. Okay? I found this out the hard way. Okay? They have the ability to exhibit a lot of Figmotropism. Everywhere where there's a notch in the stem, there's also a little bump. It's kind of hard to see probably from where you guys are. Okay? But those little bumps, when they come into contact with a surface, will secrete chemicals. Okay? Usually a little bit acidic. And they'll create a little pit in the surface. And then a little tendril will grow into that pit and keep secreting that chemical until the tendril can essentially make a hole where it can grab. Okay? In the same way that if you've ever seen like peas or sweet peas crawling up a pea fence, okay? It's that same idea, except these actively make the hole for themselves to grip. Okay? And I found that out the hard way with that plant, actually, because it used to grow along the top of my cupboard, okay, before I was married. And it just grew along the top, and I thought, oh, that's nice, it's getting kind of long and whatever. And then I got married, and I moved out of my house, and I picked it up off the top of the counter and stepped down onto the chair, and along with my plant came a section of drywall about this long and about that tall. Okay? Because this thing had put tendrils, a whole bunch of them, through the drywall. Okay? And when that piece of drywall came, there was like, it looked like veins all over the back. Okay? This thing was all the little tendrils from this plant. Okay? It had been crawling along the wall. All right? Found that. And that's a real nice thing to have to do when you've sold your house and you're moving out and suddenly there's this big hole you got to spackle. Okay? Yeah, it's not a lot of fun. All right? So, it had actually done that. And a few plants will do that. They'll secrete chemicals that help them with this Figmotropism, okay, process that they employ. Other ones, they'll just grab onto things by twisting and kind of coiling around them, and that's what peas do. Okay? So if you give them a fence, they wrap their tendrils around the fence and they hold on with those. What's the advantage of that? Gives it extra support. It actually allows you to grow tall more quickly because you don't have to support the growth with a thick stem. You got all these tendrils that are holding on to something else. All right, and that can support the plant, so you're actually using whatever it is you're grabbing onto to support you as opposed to your own stem. All right, and so these plants can get tall and get into the light and compete better. All right, so that's the advantage of Figmotropism. You can actually see that here in this picture. Okay, that kind of coiled tendril there is wrapped right around the leaf of another plant and is using it to pull itself up. All right, these two plants here, okay, you can't see it, but someone's holding this one. Okay, this actually had a stick in it. Okay, originally, that this plant had been holding on to, right? And so it was able to grow taller. They're planted at the same time. Okay, this one had a stick in it, and so it was able to grow tall using the stick for support. Okay. Everyone with me there? All right. Okay, I want you to answer those 5 questions. While you're doing that, I'm going to hand out your review sheet, and then we'll quickly talk about your review before class ends here. Okay, you know what, guys? Let's just quickly go through these so we got time to talk about your review here. Okay, so number 1, why is it that 2 identical plants that are grown from clippings of the same plant, like those 2 over there, okay, may grow up to look entirely different? Okay, it was the first thing we talked about. Basically, it's just that their shape is not part of their genetic code. Right? They are a product of their environment. If they need to grow in one direction to get sunlight or grow in one direction to get nutrients, that's the way they grow. Right? So their shape is not part of their genetic code. Number 2, any growth pattern in plants is referred to as a tropism. Hey, plants in the tropical rainforest, are they going to secrete abscisic acid? Probably not. You don't need to go dormant in the tropical rainforest. Okay, day length doesn't change, temperature doesn't change. There's not really the seasonality that there is up here. All right, so you don't want to go dormant in the rainforest. If you go dormant in the rainforest, things are going to outgrow you really fast. Okay, for number 4, long exposure to 2,4-D has been shown to produce cancerous tumors in humans. Why might this happen, even if it's a plant hormone? Well, it's still a chemical messenger, and it's a chemical messenger that stimulates rapid cell growth. Okay, rapid cell growth is often known as cancer. Okay, if it gets out of control, you get too much of it, like you would if you were exposed to 2,4-D day in and day out for a long period of time. Yeah, you could probably start showing signs of cancer. Okay, and number 5, this hormone is involved in the ripening of fruit. Ethylene, right? It's that gas that bananas really produce. All right. Now, I just handed out to you your unit exam review sheet. Okay, so that's got some suggestions for things to review. Okay, some things to kind of look up, so a few questions to answer, things like that. Okay, you can find the other part of your review on my website. So you're going to need to watch here, guys. Okay, go to Science 10 stuff on my website there. Okay, and then scroll down to biology and open that one up. Right, and if you go down near the end of biology lessons here, okay, biology lesson 21, unit exam review. That's the sheet I just gave you. Okay, it's got the picture of the cell on it and all that kind of stuff. There's a picture of an amoeba on the back and some questions. Right, but if you keep going, down near the bottom here, I've done the same thing I did for chemistry, and that is I put some old exam questions, okay, on my website for you to try. So there's, I can't remember how many multiple choice, and then there's some written response. Okay, there's also a key. All right, so if you open this one up here, Okay, you can see, okay, the old multiple choice questions that I don't use anymore. What are there? There's, okay, that's 17 of them there. There's some old written response questions that I don't use anymore. Okay, and you can look those up. Now, the key only has the answers for the multiple choice. It does not have the answers for the written response, because if I give you the answers to the written response, you won't have to look them up in your notes. So that's why I didn't put them on there. Okay, you can find the answers for all of these in your notes, and then I would suggest that you come and see me next week, Monday or Tuesday, scheduled help or lunch, to have me check them over, or we can ask when we do our formal review on Monday, okay, when we do our formal exam review then. You say, Mr. Codere, I wrote this for this question, is that a reasonable answer? And we can talk about it, okay, and that'll be fine. No, your exam is the 21st, it should be Wednesday, isn't it? Is the 21st Tuesday? Am I thinking wrong here? Right, I did change it. I keep thinking I changed it because of the band trip. That's right. So your exam is Tuesday. So we'll do our review Monday. Okay. So that's I sent out an email to all your parents last night. Okay, telling them that your exam was coming up, and I think I said Wednesday because that's what I had on the brain. But it is Tuesday. The 21st is Tuesday. Okay. I did say Tuesday. Okay. So anyway, in that email, I just told them about these resources that I've shown you. Do these over the weekend, so that on Monday when we do our kind of in-class review, you can ask good questions, you can have me check things over, and it'll be a lot more valuable to you that way. Okay? So those are the things to look at. Okay, and you shouldn't be packing up. You could be working on that right now.